We're live.
Excellent. So thank you. Can I welcome you all to our June Cabinet meeting? The regulations on virtual meetings were not renewed by government, which means Cabinet has to be held in person for decision-making processes. However, the COVID regulations mean that we cannot all meet inside the Civic Centre in a safe environment, so we cannot all be physically present tonight. We have therefore set up tonight as a hybrid meeting to ensure Cabinet members can attend, but only those present in the Civic Centre can formally vote. So tonight in the physical meeting, we have Cabinet members, Councillor Natasha Proctor, Councillor Paymana Assad, Councillor Varsha Palmer, and myself, Councillor Graham Henson. We are joined by, no, we're not joined by, I thought Paul Osborne was coming to here, so he'll be joining online, I assume.
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. So all others will be joining virtually and include Councillor Sue Anderson, Councillor Simon Brown, Councillor Keith Ferry, Councillor Christine Robson, Councillor Krishna Suresh, Councillor Adam Spursky and Councillor Antonio Weiss, and also John Higgins, Voluntary Sector Representative, and Councillor Paul Osborne. I thought you would be here, Paul. No. Other councillors are joining the call remotely for item 5. Can I ask colleagues to turn their mobile phones to silence, please? There's nothing worse than a vibrating phone during the presentation. And a few other bullet points to remember. Can Cabinet members keep your videos on at all times, but put microphones on mute unless speaking? Everyone else, can you switch off your videos and put microphones on mute until you're invited to speak? And if anyone would like to speak, please indicate by the hand function. If there's a technical problem, within the meeting, then we might have to pause and reconsider at a later. Sorry, the meeting will carry ahead because we're meeting in a public meeting in the Civic Centre. Just a reminder as well, the meeting is being audio and video recorded and will be available on the Council's website in due course. So the past, I just want to say a few introductory parts really to our June meeting because we're heading towards meeting up with people and sort of going back to what we're looking at old times, which is only pre-COVID times. But the past 18 months, I think, has been relentless. This weekend marked 6 months since COVID lockdown restrictions were reintroduced, and they have been a struggle for many, for our residents, businesses and our staff. We were ever hopeful of the roadmap, but we could have moved to more freedoms from next week. Unfortunately, this is not going to happen due to the serious concerns about the Delta variant and how quickly it is currently spreading. So hopefully with the vaccination programme, the reopening is only delayed until mid-July. Residents in Harrow are keen to get vaccinated, which has been proven by the pop-up clinics over the weekend of the 5th and 6th of June, and the mass vaccination centre finally being allowed to open in Wealdstone. My ongoing concern is the regular supply of the vaccine, especially the Pfizer vaccine, which has to be kept frozen until used. And finally, as we move slowly out of lockdown, people are starting to expect public services will also quickly move back to normal. In the council, people have been working long hours, 7 days a week, and it will need time to ensure people take their holidays and time off so they can recover from the relentless pressure they have been under during the pandemic, and this will take time. And would therefore like to propose that we move item 8, which is on our regular COVID update from Sean Harris, the Chief Executive, to be heard after item 3. And this will give residents and Cabinet the opportunity to hear from Sean the latest news about the situation in Harrow. Is that agreed?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. There's also a report on the agenda tonight from Housing. I'm just going to make sure I get the right report, which is a part 2 item, item 14. Sorry, it's item 14. It's an information report, so we just make sure that people are aware of the part 2 of that item. So instead of moving to pausing this meeting, moving to part 2 and then coming back again, I propose that we move this item to be the last item on the agenda. Is that agreed? Excellent. So now we move to, your mouse is frozen. Now move to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Councillor Philip O'Dell, who's attending another meeting on behalf of the Council this evening. Do we have any other apologies? None notified. Declarations of interest, which is item 2. The declarations of interest have been published on the council's website. Can I have any other declarations from other members present at the meeting, if you're aware of them? There's none notified. If you become present of them during the meeting, could you let us know and we'll take a note at that time. We now move on to item 3, which is petitions. I haven't been notified of any. Are there any petitions to be presented? No. Excellent, thank you very much. So we now move to item 8, which is the COVID update. The presentation has been published online if people want to look through it, but Sean will be sharing his screen as well as he goes through the presentation. So Sean, over to you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Henson. Could I just ask Nikesh to please share the presentation? Thank you very much, Nikesh. Thank you, Chair. Welcome members of the Cabinet, other councillors and members of the public. This is the latest update to the Cabinet on the 17th of June today, relating to the COVID-19 situation. So what we're going to cover this evening is we're going to cover where we are with COVID, as Councillor Henson mentioned, the delay to the full step 4 of the COVID lockdown roadmap, update on the council's response, picking up issues around service activity and others, also covering issues relating to testing, vaccination, and also planning for recovery and the overall impact the above has on the organisation. So just in terms of the situation specifically in relation to COVID, overall COVID-19 cases are increasing in Harrow from a low base. You'll see in the presentation and the slide later that yesterday's data was that Harrow was at 36.6 cases per 100,000 people. Actually, today's data, which we had just after the publication of this report presentation, is that that's risen to 42 cases per 100,000 people. And as people will know, along with the rest of the country, Harrow is seeing an increase in cases, although actually Harrow is at one of the lowest levels in London, which hasn't always been the case. People will also be aware that the lockdown restrictions, the earliest they could have been lifted was the 21st of June, and now that's been moved probably to the 19th of July. And as Councillor Henson mentioned in its introduction, this was a result of the Delta variant driving an increase in COVID-19 cases. And as we'll go on to talk about in a bit more detail, the key response to the increase in cases and issues related to the Delta variant is to ensure that more people are given first doses of the vaccine and also more people are given second doses of the vaccine. And as Councillor Henson has already also mentioned, overall the vaccination programme is progressing well, but there are challenges with sufficient supply of the Pfizer vaccine in particular at the pace that is required to meet some of the targets that have been identified over the next few weeks. I think it's also important as well, as we deal with the ongoing challenge of COVID as an emergency, that we also recognise that there are significant pressures in relation to both delivering the COVID response, but also in relation to service pressures going forward. This is a detailed slide which is very important for the record, which covers a number of key issues in relation to the actual case position. And as I said, this slightly underestimates the position as of lunchtime today. But you can even see, based upon the position set out here, the increase over the last 7 days has been around 15% in terms of case numbers. And that's probably going to be nearer 20% based upon today's data. But the positive news is, although that there is a small increase in serious illness as a result of COVID and some increased pressure on the NHS, as has been set out by government earlier in this week, the vaccination programme has significantly reduced the relationship between rise in transmission, hospitalisations and fatalities. So just to go into some of that in a little bit more detail, essentially the challenge that has come about because of the Delta variant is because essentially for two factors. One is, and nobody's absolutely clear by how much yet, but a figure of around 40 to 60% is often quoted. The Delta variant is essentially more transmissible, which means that more people potentially catch coronavirus as a result of this new variant. And secondly, the Delta variant is more resistant to just one dose of vaccine. It doesn't appear to be a significant issue when people have received both doses of vaccination, but it is more resistant to just one dose of vaccine than the previous dominant variant, the Alpha variant. And as people will be aware, this has meant a delay to the end of lockdown, and the key response to that is accelerating both first and second vaccination doses in Harrow and across the country. Obviously, partly because of the delay to lockdown easing and partly because of the response. In any event, Council continues to be involved in a number of areas related to COVID, which are set out on the presentation, everything from enforcement of the existing regulations, testing programme, the work we've been doing around the variants of concern and vaccination. And obviously a further month of lockdown and existing measures prolongs the emergency response phase that the Council's in, builds up more unmet demand in the system and continues to deliver additional pressures across the organisation, both in relation to dealing with COVID, but also in the ongoing pressure on services. So in terms of the detail of the lockdown announcement, the exit roadmap has been extended from the 21st of June, probably to the 19th of July, although there is a review after 2 weeks and it's possible the end of restrictions could be brought forward. Restrictions remain largely the same as they were or they are at the moment from next Monday. There are some small changes to the rules around weddings and wakes, but overall the situation will continue as currently. Also, in terms of council services and obviously for our residents, the working from home advice and stipulation will continue at least until the 19th of July. And as a result of that, that will delay the opening of the Civic Hub, which would have allowed a greater number of staff to return to the office, at least on a part-time basis. The vaccination programme has been central to the work the council has done with the NHS for the past 6 months. But again, I have been involved in a series of meetings, as have a number of senior colleagues over the past week, where there has been even more focus on ensuring that as many people as possible get their first and second doses before the 19th of July, in order to both protect them and also to enable a better opportunity for lockdown to be lifted at this date. One of the other things that it's important to report to the Cabinet on is that there are some changes in terms of community testing. You'll know that the Council's been very heavily involved in the provision of asymptomatic tests across a number of sites. That will still continue to some degree from 2 sites within the Civic Centre and probably within the Town Centre Library. But with the expansion of the pharmacy network and the availability of home testing and through other routes, the ability for people to gain testing through those other routes means that the council is in a position, and we've been asked by DHSC to scale back the availability of testing from a number of sites, and that's because demand has reduced as people have found the other routes more convenient now that they've been put in line in terms of pharmacies and people being able to order home tests. But we will continue to provide some in-person venues across the borough, probably until probably well into the autumn, but dependent upon the specific advice and requests from government. And there is a change to the funding mechanism as well, but we are confident that we can contain our costs within the new funding approach. And there is a decision at the end which formally authorises the council to enter into that approach overall. So community testing continues with a role for the council, but there is a significant expansion in the ability for people to get tested, which we are still encouraging people to do twice a week by using other routes. So in terms of the vaccination programme, this is a very significant focus. Byron Hall is now a mass vaccination centre and is in a position to offer Pfizer for all first doses. As it says on there, the current phase of the vaccination programme includes residents over 21 years old. I think the announcement today is that by the end of the week, vaccination will be available to everyone over 18. This is enormously helpful in order to be able to plan, being able to target people generally who haven't had their first dose in order to be able to bring them forward. And there's an awful lot of work going on at the moment by the council and the local NHS in order to increase the amount of vaccination capacity available at Byron Hall, and also to run a number of other centres on a pop-up basis over the next few weeks. Members of the Cabinet and other members will be aware that we set up 2 pop-up clinics in different parts of the borough a couple of weeks ago, which were incredibly successful and popular. And again, we'll be looking to do that as soon as we can when vaccine supply becomes available, because it is an ongoing challenge to make sure that there is sufficient vaccine available, basically to meet the demand, and more importantly to be able to plan for people to be able to be vaccinated, knowing that that supply is available. And that is a mixture of ensuring that people get their first doses, but also very importantly, because of the Delta variant, ensuring that people get their second doses as quickly as possible. And the time frame again has been brought forward, so that can now be within 4 weeks rather than the 8 weeks that there was originally. So vaccination will be very much the focus or the priority for the next few weeks. This slide for the record, as earlier this week, shows the proportion of people in Harrow in different cohorts where available that's had their first vaccination, and then the second column covers the proportion of people, the percentage of people who have had a first dose in that particular cohort who have had their second dose. And you can see that of the people who've had the first dose in many of the most vulnerable cohorts, the vast majority of those have already had their second dose, which is clearly important in terms of mitigating the potential impact of hospitalisation and death. So that probably covers the key issues in relation to dealing with the COVID challenge as things are. This is a slide that I've used at the last couple of Cabinet briefings, which essentially covers the fact that we are still in an emergency response at the moment. We are moving into planning for something that looks like a mixture of an emergency response and some return to services pre-COVID. But there is a significant amount of work to do in terms of both recovery, but also the fact that the NHS and social care will be very much focused on treatment catch-up. There's a whole range of economic challenges for businesses, focus around education for children, and very significant impact in terms of dealing with hidden harm and mental health. And I think it's fair to say that there will be, a very stretched scenario basically for a long while in terms of continuing to deliver services in a new way. Many services will remain not in person for some time to come, and also that there is a significant work in relation to recovery and dealing with some of the unmet and pent-up demand that exists due to the pandemic. So a significant challenge in terms of capacity and resilience for the organisation. And I do think it is important to focus in terms of this position around organisational capacity. We have been running on an emergency footing for 16 months, and it has been a relentless process with a very significant proportion of council workforce delivering services remotely and from home, and many frontline staff needing to deliver services in a very complex environment. And we are seeing already the significant demands around social care, housing and other services which have been under pressure or not accessible due to the pandemic. And I think it would also be fair to say that as lockdown eases, although the pressure and the amount of work that the council has to do itself hasn't changed, there is a significant level of public demand, and perhaps not surprisingly, a lack of awareness about how much of the council's capacity is focused on continuing to deliver services remotely, responding to the pandemic and planning for recovery. And I think it's important that we try and provide as much advice and awareness as possible, knowing that it will take several months, if not longer, for that capacity challenge to reduce. And obviously we have a very large number of staff who have not been able to take their allocated annual leave as a result of the work that's been required from the pandemic, and that will mean a capacity challenge as people seek to do that over the summer period. So just in terms of a conclusion, Chair and members of the Cabinet and others, the situation in Harrow in relation to COVID is still positive. The case rates are still relatively low, certainly compared to where they are before, and the impact in terms of hospitalisation and mortality is very low compared to previously. But there is a big challenge around the Delta variant, the growth in case numbers, and that has very much put the focus on ensuring that between now and the 19th of July, there is a maximisation of the amount of people who get a first and second dose of the vaccine in order to improve protection of them, and also to allow society to return to normal and the economy to recover. And as I've said previously, just covered, big challenge around ensuring organisational resilience and capacity, and that there will be a significant focus on COVID and COVID related matters for a number of months, testing the organisation's resilience. And Chair, there is just a formal recommendation at the end, just to note the drafting of the new business plan for targeted testing and to authorise Charlie Stewart, the Corporate Director, to enter into a new agreement with government through the Department of Health and Social Care to continue to provide that testing. So hopefully that's a comprehensive and useful update for the Cabinet on where we are in response to COVID-19. And I think as well, just want to finally say, Chair, just to again pay tribute to staff across the organisation at all levels and in all services who have continued to be involved in a whole range of response, whether the service or COVID specific, over this very long period of time. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. Is there any questions or comments? Can't see any hands go up then. I think you gave a lot of information in the report, Sean, and once again, thank you very much for that. It is sort of very fast moving time still, and we're forever hopeful that, you know, the vaccination programme can actually run its course, that we can move out of lockdown by July, because people are looking forward to holidays now, aren't they, really? But don't forget, this will be 7 months, and it's already having an impact across services where we're getting rising demand. So if there's no questions or comments, I'll just go to the recommendation, because as Sean says, there is a recommendation at the end, because we're extending the lockdown process. We need to agree the recommendation. So first of all, can we note the presentation which has been published on the council website, and also agree the recommendation that's within the presentation? I got asked the people in the room, so yes, they're all saying I couldn't look apparently, but I do. Thank you very much, Sean. Greatly appreciate it. We now move back to item number 4, which is public questions. We haven't received any for this meeting. We now move to councillor questions, which is with six questions have been received in 15 minutes will be allowed for this item on the agenda. The published questions will be taken as read, and we'll go straight to the answer, and then any supplementary questions. So we'll move to question number 1. I'm making sure Marilyn's on the call.
I am. Thank you, Leader.
Excellent. So question number 1 is, does the leader take seriously motions to full council that are adopted? And all I can really say, Marilyn, is the short answer is yes. And if you had said which motion you were interested in, I could have investigated where we were with implementing. Do you have a supplementary question, Marilyn?
Well, yes, I do actually. And I think you've made a valid point there. I maybe should have been a bit more explicit, but actually, I just wanted to be reassured that you do take these things seriously. You see, the problem is, and there is a problem here, in February 2017, not everybody that is now involved were councillors then, but on the 23rd of February 2017, the council adopted an international definition of anti-Semitism, and it was very heartfelt, actually, the wonderful speeches that, particularly from your own group leader, from Sajid Shah and from Karaman Shamdani and various people. It was wonderful, actually. But unfortunately, it seems to me that it may be that people have just forgotten that that was adopted. But there are members of your team, as it were, of your group, who don't appear to have taken that on board properly. I mean, for example, please forgive me, but Councillor Assad tweeted this year on the 27th of April, so it's apartheid in the affirmative, talking about Israel. And yet, if you look at the definition of anti-Semitism, it actually says that ascribing behaviour to Israel, that the country is racist, is actually an act of anti-Semitism. That is clearly what we adopted. And more recently, the chairman of the planning committee, quite a high-profile person, Councillor Fitzpatrick, decided to participate in a demonstration, which was perfectly legal, outside of Bob Blackman's office, and advertised it as Harrow East Labour. Got involved, made a real effort to advertise it and make sure that she
I have a question, Marilyn. Because...
I do, but you need to hear the background, because otherwise you won't be able to answer it properly. And I do apologise, I should have made it clearer in the first question. And the things that people were saying there were pretty horrendous and overtly anti-Semitic, because they made no effort whatsoever to put any balance to the subject. They called Israel a terror state, and all in all, it was an absolute disgrace, albeit a legal demonstration. And so I put it to you, Leader, and I'd like a full answer, please. Are you going to do anything about these people in your group who are unable to, absolutely unable to make any sense of this very important definition of anti-Semitism? Are you going to discipline them, suspend them for 6 months, sack them? Are you going to do anything about the people in your group who may not have realised it, have done quite a lot against something that this council rightly adopted? Or are you going to ignore their behaviour? Because if you ignore it, we can only assume that you're part of the problem.
You've made a number of serious accusations there, Marilyn, and I will investigate some of them to see what's behind this. It was Councillor Barry Kendler and Councillor Michael Borio who moved that motion. I remembered it exceptionally well, and the people who spoke on it about the definition of anti-Semitism. And also we've moved a number of other motions over the years around other sorts of attacks against religious beliefs and responsibilities. And actually, I'm quite concerned about the way you continually are framing these questions and making accusations against members of my group. This isn't the first time that you've done that, Marilyn.
Tweets don't lie. And there's YouTube footage of Councillor Fitzpatrick at this demonstration.
Marilyn, you've had made your point. I said I'll investigate it, and I hope you investigate the number of emails I'm being copied into about representatives of your group. It is a shame, and I say it's a shame, that the Nolan principles are not upheld by a number of councillors in this council, but most of them are coming from your own group. But I will investigate it, and I will respond in due course. So thank you very much, Marilyn.
And if you don't deal with it, you're part of the problem.
We're now moving on to question number 2. We've got accounts. It's asked for by Anjana Patel. Is Anjana present?
Yeah. Do I ask the question?
No, it's the questions. The question is going to be answered by Councillor Paymana Assad, who's dealing with the fly tipping area. So
Thank you.
Paymana.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Patel, for your question. As you may know, fly tipping is a national issue and it affects Harrow as it does every other London borough. This morning, I was out on a walkabout with our dedicated enforcement team in Burnt Oak, Broadway, looking at the issues of fly tipping, illegal street trading and other issues. We are using our powers to make sure that perpetrators of fly tipping are investigated and fined or prosecuted. As I saw this morning, and as happens across the borough, the council looks to remove fly tips within 2 working days of them being reported, and the licensing and enforcement team proactively investigate fly tips and take enforcement action whenever there is evidence of the perpetrators. Do you have a supplementary question?
Yeah, sure, I have. Council data shows an increase of over 3,500 fly tipping reports for 2020-2021 compared to 2019-20, whereas neighbouring Brent has seen a decrease of 3,000 reports during the same period. Do you regret voting against our costed proposals at the February Council meeting for a fly tipping task force and a free bulk waste collection service? Why did you oppose extra measures to tackle fly tipping in our borough?
Thank you, Councillor Patel. We have a dedicated licensing and enforcement team that actively pursues fly tippers and issues fixed penalty notices and takes further legal action where merited. We analyse all fly tips by the type, size and location, and the team identify hotspots, understanding the root causes, which allow us to make informed, targeted actions to tackle this antisocial behaviour. Now, we understand that there are specific hotspot areas across the borough, and we're making sure that we put improved warning signage in key areas, and we're working with local properties and managing agents to address waste issues if they are identified. We keep our streets clean and remove fly tips within 2 working days, as I said, when they're reported via the website. We understand that small fly tips can attract additional fly tipping, so as I said, we're trying to make sure that we put up improved warning signage and take people to court should we need to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paymana. We now move on to question number 3, which is from Councillor Anjana Patel to Councillor Varsha Palmer. Varsha.
Thank you, Chair. The Council actively promotes and invests in greenery and trees. Current initiatives being taken forward include the annual tree planting programme for additional 300 highway trees, supported by the grant funding, and a new tree sponsorship scheme in partnership with the Trees for Streets charity, which actively encourages residents to apply for trees to be planted outside the houses or in Harrow's parks and open spaces, long as they meet the criteria, because sometimes you can't plant trees for various reasons of health and safety, etc. Do you have a supplemental?
Yes, I do. According to new research, Harrow is now 10th place in the ranking of London boroughs for the amount of trees coverage, considering much of Harrow was originally built to be leafy suburbs. This result is unimpressive. What extra measures will you take to increase Harrow's tree coverage? As the council has declared a climate emergency, 10th place isn't a glowing record after 11 years of Labour administration, is it?
Well, I don't know where you get your data from, but we are promoting trees and greenery all the time, and we do have a lot that's going on. Obviously, in the last year, we won't have done much because of COVID, and I think you keep forgetting that. So, yes, we do promote.
No, I don't. Councillor Palmer, I have forgotten. That's why
I've asked. I'm trying to answer your question.
I quoted 2020. I did not talk about the pandemic year, and that's my data is actually coming from a
Excuse me, can we stop this cross talking, please? I said right at the beginning, if people want to stop, they put their hand up. I'm not having it where people keep interrupting themselves. Varsha, do you want to finish answering the question?
I have, Chair, because she asked, do we promote, and we do actively promote, and we do have residents who come forward requesting for trees to be planted, etc. Unfortunately, we do have to wait for the planting season, so it may feel like delayed, but it isn't, and we do, you know, work on it all the time. So thank you for that.
Thank you. We now move on to question number 4, which is from Councillor Pritesh Patel to Councillor Natasha Proctor. Natasha.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Patel, for your question. In short, yes, the way that we present our finances is transparent. Our finances go through scrutiny, they go through GARMS, and all spends over £500 are published on the website. So this is very transparent. Quarterly financial monitoring is also presented to Cabinet. This focuses on the controllable revenue budget, which is circa £175 million. The annual budget report also shows how our budget has been reduced year on year via the ever diminishing revenue support grant. Other grants funding that the Council receives has no impact on a controllable revenue budget. One example, for example, is the circa £150 million dedicated schools grant, which we passport straight to the schools. Adding this grant to our controllable budget would serve no purpose and would distract from the amount of actual money that we can spend. For example, for other grants, we put a matching income and expenditure budget into the account, so the value of the grant, therefore the bottom line impact is £0. Once again, it does not impact on our controllable budget. If we overspent the grant, it would be reflected in the forecast. If we underspent the grant, it's transferred onto reserve to pay back. We only spend some money because it's grant funded, and if we did not get the grant, we would not provide that service. Despite all of this, current transparency, an offer has been made to include a grant appendix in the quarterly finance reports, which shows all grants, similar to what happened with the COVID grants of this past year. So I trust that that satisfies your question.
It certainly helps a little bit that you recognise that the grants need to be mentioned in the reports. But I do have a supplementary question, which I asked your predecessor. Unfortunately, he was unable to give me a straight answer, so I hope you will be able to do a little bit better. Before I'd ask the question, I'd just like to point out to you that of the 129 million received in COVID-related grants, only 28 million has been shown in the main summary table of the outturn report. I realise the reasoning behind that and what you're trying to do, but that in a financial statement is not acceptable because everything that goes through in or out needs to be accounted for and needs to be published. You have totally failed to mention the 360 million received by Harrow Council for non-COVID related grants last year. What is the reason for not to disclose the total government grants received by Harrow Council in your outturn reports? And I don't accept that you just because the grants come in and you've spent it, that you don't need to mention it in your summary reports. It has to be mentioned.
I've already answered that question in my answer that I gave you to start with, that the offer has been made that the grants appendix will be included in the quarterly finance reports, even though it's not part of our general fund that we can spend on where we like its grants. But I have already told you we're going to be including the appendix of that in future.
I'm glad that you're going to include it in the future. I hope it's in more detail. Thank you very much for that.
We now move on to question number 5. Natasha.
Thank you. This is related to the Regeneration project of the last financial year. So this figure relates to that programme which came prior to the current Harrow Strategic Development Partnership, so its predecessor. As has been said on many occasions now, the Regeneration programme is the most significant and long-lasting programme that the Council will undertake. The world has moved on significantly since the Council embarked on its regeneration plans, and the Council rightly paused its original plans that have been put in place to ensure that it has a new direction of travel that achieves its regeneration objectives, shares the financial risk with an experienced development partner alongside benefiting from the knowledge and experience of said partner, who is Waits, and adapting to the new environment post-COVID-19. We're in a different world now to when the original plans were drawn up and they weren't fit for purpose in this new normal. The right of value that you raise in your question should not deter from what are the best regeneration plans for the Council going forwards. The focus now should be on what the regeneration programme will achieve for the borough and its residents, and that includes 1,575 units of housing, of which a minimum of those will be 39% affordable, as well as the new civic position. So I hope that answers your question, but do you have a supplement?
I do have a supplementary. I mean, the writing off of 7.1 million from the revenue outturn budget suggests deeply that there's endemic problems in how we manage our projects and resources within the council. You know, you mentioned that the 7.153 million written off is due to the previous sort of a project, regeneration project. But that is the reason why it's 7.1 million is because you've totally failed in those projects, and you've totally failed in delivering anything for several years on the regeneration front to realize the money spent. And you've only, because you've failed, you're now restarting the whole program in the form of a guise of HSDP partnership and so forth. My question to you is, what other activities have suffered as a result of backfilling this loss to achieve a balanced position in your budget? And has the write-off been added to the total cost of the regeneration project so far? That means not just the HSDP cost, but the entire cost since the regeneration program began.
Thank you for that. I just have to start off by saying I completely disagree with what you say about no regeneration having taken place at all. I'm a councillor in Wealdstone, and you just have to walk along Wealdstone High Street to see the activities that, despite the pandemic, have still been able to take place. If you go to Wealdstone Square now, it's completely different to where it was a year ago, let alone 2 years ago. So I think you're wrong there. It's not a failure. We're just restarting where we were and going forwards differently. And no other activities have suffered. We've managed this year the efficiencies in year, so no, nothing else has changed. And the plans are going to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move to question number 6, which is from Councillor Kanti Rabadia to Councillor Paymana Assad. Paymana.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Rabadia, for your question. Sorry, I'm hearing playback.
Kanti, could you mute for a while, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rabadia, for your question. The murder of Sarah Everard was shocking for all Londoners, as was the murders of Bibba and Nicole across the border in Brent, who were 2 young women who had family and friends in Harrow. As a young woman myself, it was incredibly concerning that the person arrested and being charged for Sarah Everard's murder was a serving police officer. Now, whilst Harrow is considered one of the safest boroughs in London, we take the safety of women and girls on our streets very seriously. I have met with the borough commander a number of times already to make it clear that the safety of women and girls in Harrow is a priority no matter what time of the day it is, and that women and girls should feel safe on our streets. I know that this is also a priority for the borough commander too. I've also met with women and girls organisations that are working on tackling violence against women and girls in Harrow to work up plans on ways we can work together. In terms of specific action that the council has taken, we've done a number of things, including working with the police to make our streets safer. For example, we've upgraded our street lighting to the latest LED technology to help improve the quality and reliability of lighting so that people walking the streets of Harrow during the hours of darkness feel safer. We are working with the police, schools and local businesses in Harrow to launch an initiative called Safe Places. This is where if someone feels vulnerable or at risk and the business has a sign up saying safe space, that person can go into the shop and the business owner will contact the police. We are also running the Safe Haven scheme again during the summer. This scheme is where officers from the council, police and voluntary sector organisations engage with people who are particularly vulnerable in the evenings in the town centre or coming out of premises that have licences. We've also upgraded our CCTV to a digital platform which will provide a much higher quality system for the use of crime prevention and public protection. So in conclusion, Councillor Rabadia, the council is taking this issue seriously and is delivering to make Harrow a safe place for everybody. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, Councillor Paymana Assad, I do have a supplementary. So thank you for that. The proposed new civic centre in Wealdstone is obviously an area where there's sort of the occurrence of crime is much higher than the rest of Harrow, including antisocial behaviour. So the civic centre will not have enough parking spaces for, anyone, staff, residents and councillors, so to speak. Now, generally our meetings are held sort of in the evenings or later on, when it's dark. Now, how does the accommodation strategy address safety concerns for everyone using that building, at all times, and especially the new civic at night? And will you feel safe parking several seats away from the building for an evening meeting? And, when you come to the conclusion, what kind of consultation has happened with all the stakeholders mentioned?
Thank you, Councillor Rabadia, for that. As you know, that this is an ongoing conversation in regards to the new civic centre and the plans being drawn up. We've had these conversations in our working groups, across party working groups with councillors, and I understand the concern in regards to women councillors or other staff members across the council maybe not feeling safe. We will obviously devise plans to make sure that all staff, including women, feel safe parking or walking to the new civic building, and we'll make sure that we have consultations with all staff to do this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes the councillor questions. We now move on to item number 6, which is the key decision schedule, which is June to August. Could members note that the Treasury Management Shared Service arrangements with the GLA has been deferred to the July Cabinet meeting? Is that noted? Excellent. Item 7 is progress on scrutiny projects. Can you note the update on pages 19 to 20? Excellent. We now move on to item number 9, which is on page 21 of our agenda tonight, which is the adoption of the Edgware Town supplementary planning document prepared jointly with the London Borough of Barnet. Just to remind people, this is a joint SPD. So this SPD has been under development and consultation for a number of years. There have been a large number of briefings attended by ward councillors, which have also been extended to other councillors who wanted to go along. As members will be aware, Edgware Town Centre is located across both the administrative boundaries of Barnet and Harrow, with the majority of the designated area within London Borough of Barnet, which is why Barnet primarily led on the SPD, and Edgware is also designated as a major centre in London Plan. As previously reported, the purpose of the SPD is to set out expectations for the Edgware Town Centre in terms of regeneration and development, such as improvements to public realm, nighttime economy and leisure, highways and the provision of new housing and infrastructure. This SPD will provide Edgware Town Centre with more detailed planning guidance than either local plan from Barnet or Harrow, along with additional supporting evidence-based. It must be noted that most of the area is in Barnet, with the area in Harrow being governed by the Harrow plan. The draft proposals came to Cabinet in December, I think, last year, where we approved the draft Edgware Town Centre SPD for public consultation. Due to COVID, face-to-face and public meetings could not be held, it was therefore agreed to widen the other consultation strands. This report outlines the responses from the 2 local planning authorities to the consultation outcomes and recommends that Cabinet adopts the SPD, subject to a number of amendments in response to the outcomes of the consultation. The recommendations for the report are set out on pages 22. Is there any questions or comments? I see Keith put his hand up very quickly. Keith.
Yeah, I think it's very important that we recognise that this is a joint venture between Harrow Council and Barnet Council. In the past, of course, councils have worked in borough silos, as it were, but we've recommended that when they started looking at an SPD for the Barnet side of Edgware, that we came on board with them so that we could produce a comprehensive plan for a town centre, which unfortunately just happens to be split between 2 boroughs.
Thank you, Keith. That's a very good point. So I missed those 2 points. Paul, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I welcome the fact that we have an SPD coming to Cabinet. I know it's been driven largely by Barnet. I hope that soon we'll have more SPDs coming for places in Harrow, so we can look to protect some of the suburban bits of Harrow from over development, particularly in terms of tall buildings. There's just a couple of points I'd like to make on this. Firstly, I do think, and again, I accept most of this is in Barnet and they have a different policy, but it would be helpful if the comments on tall buildings were a bit stronger than they are in this report. And the other thing is just on the ward councillor comments. It's not clear to me how they are reflected in the appendix, well, it's described as appendix 2 on the report, but it's appendix B, I presume, in the actual thing. Just how those ward councillors' comments are reflected in the report. They just seem to be down, I think, as residents rather than ward councillors. I think it might be just helpful to distinguish between the ward councillor comments and other comments, just so people have a sense of accountability. Thank you.
You've raised 2 points there of why we don't have an SPT. I can answer that, and I've said it before, because, and I think you are aware as well, Paul, that an SPD cannot introduce new policy. Rather, it provides guidance to adopted policies already in place. So within Harrow, the Edgware Town Centre and SPD area, which is covered by this report, is located within the Edgware and Boat Oak sub-area. And this has been set out in the report tonight. So it's for our part within Harrow, we already accommodate this within the Harrow Core Strategy 2012. So specifically the core strategy policies, and I've got them listed here. CS8 sets out a number of policies, CS8A, C, D, H and I, that all promote appropriate development within the scope of the SPD area. These policies provide a basis on which an SPD may be brought forward, and therefore the SPD will assist in giving effect to and delivering against those policies within the area. So it actually supports what we have within the Harrow plan. Within the Barnet plan, they have designated this as a high-rise area. The concern that's alluded to around high-rise developments being made in Harrow, our borough plan already states that it has to be fitting in with the local area, which is mainly predominantly 2-storey properties. So it would be out of place to put in a high-rise building within the small segment of Harrow that we have under the current arrangements. With the consultations results, there's a number of comments came back, and they are listed in there, and they aren't signposted as individuals because they're normally anonymised when consultation results come back. But the points have all been raised and addressed within the report itself. But this has also gone through the Barnet cabinet meeting last night, who've led on the whole of the SPD. And those points that have been raised in the Harrow one will also be taken into account when we go out to consultation later this year on the Harrow plan.
If I could just come back on that last thing, because there are specific, the chairman of Cannon Parks Estate, the Barnet Bugle blog are specifically referred to rather than being anonymised. I do think, Edgware ward councillor or Cannon's ward councillor or whatever would be an appropriate thing. It's just not clear from this what the ward councillor comments were, and I just think, when we hopefully do more of these over time, it's just a helpful thing to have as a kind of just so people can see what their ward councillors have been saying on their behalf.
We can take it forward when we do the Harrow plan, which is going out to consultation. But if you get if we get the plan right, we won't need that many SPDs. They're only material considerations, but it sort of underpins what's already in the borough plan. So we'll hopefully get it right. But your points are noted, and we'll look to do that. How we could do that in future consultations. Is there any other comments? I don't see any hands raised. So the recommendations are on page 22. Are they all agreed? Thank you. We now move on to item 10, which is the Modernisation Recovery Funding, which is on pages 251 to 266. Natasha.
Thank you, Graham. Just in introduction to this report, I'd like to say the country is about to emerge from the worst crisis it has seen since the Second World War. The COVID pandemic has greatly affected the residents, businesses and communities of all of Harrow, not to mention the staff of the council. Much work is required to recover the council from these adverse effects and ensure it can quickly stand back on its feet, support our residents and continue the improvements that were planned before the pandemic struck. This work to put the council back on its feet is broken down in this report into 2 sections, which I'll briefly outline. The first concerns restarting in full the modernisation programme. The move out of the Civic Centre in March last year happened at very short notice and in a way that nobody could have been prepared for. I want to give our thanks to the staff that so brilliantly dealt with such trying circumstances and worked literally around the clock to ensure services continued and that our residents were supported. Our efforts now must be to continue the modernisation of the council, which will be critical to ensure staff are able to best support residents in the future in the new normal and an ever-changing world. This includes moving the council to a new normal way of working to continue being able to work agilely and flexibly, bring in much needed improvements to the way we manage and support staff and the culture of the organisation, also to introduce new technologies, processes and models to services in order to make them more efficient and more effective in their support to residents. The next section of the report proposes adding temporary additional capacity to 2 key areas to provide a firm foundation to the council's transformation and support to its residents again. Firstly, to HR, so that there is support for managers and staff as they cope with the pressing changes in employee-related issues. And secondly, in the leadership of community safety, which has been discussed partly tonight already, to support the changes needed in this area. Funding is available from the government's flexible use of capital receipts scheme, which allows councils to use capital receipts to fund transformation and change, but not to use on other general revenue costs. The council needs to prepare itself to move from how it has operated during the pandemic to how it will work and recover after the lockdown has ended. Only by having an effective modern organisation will the council be able to support residents and businesses during recovery and in the longer term. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. Is there any questions? Paul?
Not really a question, it's more of a comment. I mean, I'm sure the people of Pinner are delighted to know that they've lost Waxwell Lane car park in order to fund greater HR and training in the council. I just want to say, and I know that obviously this is an area that does need development within the council, but it has to be seen against the context of the other services the council does or doesn't provide. And I am deeply concerned at the amount of money. We've heard about a £7 million write-off for the Regeneration project. We're spending £7 million on MS Dynamics at the last cabinet meeting. We're now spending 4.4 million on HR, and that's on top of the various HR increases in previous budgets over the past few years. And I would just say, you know, you are making a political choice as to where you spend the money. And I would maintain that some of the frontline services are where that money is needed, rather than the back of house services that this is one of. And I'm just slightly wary about it, and I'm not convinced, having gone through in some detail with officers, it will deliver quite what you expect. And I'm also concerned that it's just a one-off boost and then doesn't have any sustainable funding going beyond that, and just how you then don't end up in the same place, you know, 5-6 years down the line.
As you said, that was a comment. Christine.
Thank you, Leader. Mine is a comment too. I wanted to, but actually, Councillor Osborne's made my task easier for me, because I thought I was going to have to bring people's memories back to, I think it was our last meeting in the full council chamber, when Mr. Osborne, Councillor Osborne, made a very strong statement about how little use a decent HR service is to the council, and you just referred to it again, so that's extremely helpful, Paul, thank you. Because Natasha, as you will know, one of the most important things that is aiding our very hard-working staff in their recovery has been the support, the various kinds of support that the council has been able to offer them through HR services. And it just goes to show what a difference there is between weasel words of saying, oh, well done, council, and true commitment to actually support the very hard-working officers and people who work for the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. John.
Thanks, Leader. Yeah, my just comments really. I mean, this is a very complex piece of work which will go on over many years. I suppose I just wanted to make the point that I think the voluntary sector can be really helpful in some of this work as you move forward. I mean, certainly where you're looking at trying to support people to use new ways of interacting with the council in terms of new technology, there's lots of people that still need help to do that. And the extent to which that we can use the voluntary sector to develop sort of, I don't know, hubs or whatever around the borough to support the wider aspirations. I think the sector will be very interested and willing to work with you on that. You talk about consultation where it's needed in various parts of the programme, and obviously the sector can be very, very useful to you in aiding that really, and we welcome so doing that. I suppose the other area that springs to mind is where you're doing these whole service reviews, the extent to which how services are delivered in the future differently within a sort of best value sort of framework, the extent to which local organisations, local services can be part of that really, since you know that they will really know how to respond on the ground. So it's just really to point out those sort of very obvious things really about how the sector welcomes continued partnership work, but also how particularly in this whole programme we think we could be particularly helpful.
Thank you very much, John. John's put his hand up again.
No, no, sorry, I'm trying to put it down.
Thought it was a supplementary comment. There's no other hands up. Natasha, did you want to quickly respond?
I take on board the various things that were said. I just would like to reiterate the point that the funding for this comes from projects that can't be used on frontline services and general fund, things like that. So we are using it in the best way that we can, basically, to further the causes and the aims and the outcomes for people that live in this borough, to make things more efficient and to become a more modern looking council as we emerge from the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to make two comments from what's been said before we move to the recommendations. I think we've worked exceptionally well across the voluntary and community sector during the pandemic, and there's a very strong relationship that's in place. And so I appreciate John's sort of comments that have come tonight of how we look forward to delivering some services in the future and how we can reach out to do things in a different way. And I think that's really what it's about. It's sort of people used to talk about modernity, didn't they, and modernisation, but I think we're in a new world of how things are operated now, the way people are working. When we went into the pandemic in March last year, we mustn't forget we had a very antiquated systems that couldn't work that well remotely, and people have got the IT team who are actually present tonight have done a lot of work to enable these services to continue as we've gone through the pandemic. What this is doing is actually training people to do things properly. And I think that, and any major company, anyone from the top 100 companies, which we meet on a regular basis across the North West London Alliance, will all tell you that the investment in staff is one of the most important things you can do. So it's the short-term additional capacities to bring people up to speed so they can, I think the recommendations mentions it very well. So they support transformation so that all staff and managers can be appropriately helped as they grapple to restart services and move forward as the pandemic lifts. And it's been able to do that in a properly modern way, but supported way to make sure we're doing it right. So I think this is an investment in staff and people, but it's also an investment of how the return is a better is a more improved way we deal with residents as well, which is a key one going forward, so they don't have all these multiple access points to things coming through the council. So the recommendations are on page 252 and 253. Can they be agreed? Excellent. So we now move on to item number 11, which is the procurement of pensions administration systems. Can I ask that the confidential background papers are noted? Otherwise, Cabinet will need to move into a private session. Is that okay? If you're going to ask any question, make sure we don't get into part 2, please. Natasha.
Thank you, Graham. So I'm going to just kind of outline top level here. I've learned a lot about pensions in the last few months, so I'm going to try and keep it brief because it's pretty business as usual, to be honest. Basically, this report sets out the proposed approach to the procurement of the pensions administration system in readiness for the expiry of the existing contract. So it's recommended to approve the commencement of a procurement of the provision of pensions administration software and the hosting thereof. Approve the use of the National Local Government Pension Scheme, the LGPS framework, as the procurement route, and to delegate authority to authorise any procurement decisions made through this process, and to award the contract for the pensions administration system following a compliance procurement to the Corporate Director of Resources, me, following consultation with the Director of Finance and Assurance and the Deputy, also me, and the Portfolio Holder for Finance and Resources. Importantly, this is all funded by the pension fund, so there's no impact on the general fund, and it's really just something that we need to move on with. So thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. Is there any questions on this report? No. So can we move to the recommendations? I think we've gone through quite significant briefings on these. So if we can move to the recommendations, which are on page 267, is that agreed? or 268, sorry. Agreed. We now move to item 12, which is the revenue and capital outturn report, which is on page 275 to 340. Natasha.
Thank you, me again. You're going to be bored of listening to me soon. So as you know, oh, I'm echoing from somebody. No, not anymore. Good. So this is the final budget monitoring reports for the 2020-2021. And to start with, I just want to give a huge thanks to our Director of Finance, Dawn Calvert, and the entire finance team for the hours and hours of hard work that have gone into this report, and for so brilliantly managing the finances during the pandemic. To return a balanced outturn at this point, given the enormous pressure on resources and the exceptional challenges that COVID brought, is nothing short of incredible. So a huge thank you to everybody involved, from everybody, I think. The final outturn on the revenue budget after the planned uses of reserves, which are largely applied to fund one-off projects and cross-divisional adjustments, including one-off income, is in a balanced position after transfers to reserves, which is the main takeaway from the outturn reports, I think. But just some figures of interest to note, to pull some up in case people haven't read through all of the pages of the reports, even though I'm sure you all have. The final spend on the total capital programme of 54,597,000, 58% of the total capital programme budget. It's the final spend on the general fund of 42,060,000, which is 58% of budget. The variance of 30,204,000 made up of proposed slippage of 20.684 million and a residual variance of 9.52 million. The final spend on the housing revenue accounts capital programme, that's 12.537 million, and the variance of 10.041 million, which is made up of proposed slippage of 8.94 million and a net underspend of 1.1 million. These figures have been compiled in conjunction with the management of all of the COVID support grants and other finances that have been managed in these unprecedented times. This excellent financial management has also allowed reserves to be slightly increased, which was, I think, unexpected at some points during the past year. But this is in order to support the council going forward into what is going to be very, very difficult times ahead. As mentioned, there are now some serious challenges, particularly in adult social care. Demands increased by over 20%. And there's great uncertainty over the future funding position and what will happen next. But more on that next year. For now, we have a balanced outturn. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. Is there any questions? Paul.
Thank you. Can we just have a breakdown on the 7.153 million that we're writing off for abortive costs, please, either from Natasha or from Dawn?
Thank you. I do have them, but Dawn might have them to hand, but we can probably send that out, Paul, because they're quite complicated. There's quite a few of them, but we can make sure they get circulated if we can't get it for you this evening. Thank you.
I mean, I think it would be helpful if we just went through, at least on a high level, because it's a lot of money to write off. And whilst it was said in answer to questions, which is undoubtedly true, that the world has changed, it's worth noting that all of these projects were aborted long before COVID came along. And unless, you know, you are claiming a level of clairvoyance, which I don't think you have, these things were all flawed and stopped before COVID came along. And I just think the taxpayers really have a right to know how this £7 million was wasted.
I'm using myself. It is all written up in the report for people to refer back to, but let me just dig that out to confirm. So as we've already spoken about the Regen programme, we also have some customs codings and some other issues from the depot. So that equals, hang on, let's see. No, these are the write-offs. Sorry, Paul. I'm talking to Dawn at the moment, and we'll get this figures for you to send out.
Can they be published as part of the minutes then?
I'm sure that'll be fine.
They will show up in other reports as we go through.
Well, this is the main process that would show up. I don't know if Dawn wants to respond, but this is the main report that would show up these figures. Once they're written off, they're written off. I mean, and there is no breakdown of that 7.1 million that I could see in the report. So which particular project was it? Was it the Civic Centre? Was it one of the other schemes that we've decided not to go ahead with? Just so we can understand where that money was spent.
We can make sure they're circulated to you, but we can also include them in the course one report when that comes out in the next one, so they will be available for people to review.
Thank you.
Just right. This is sorry. Councillor Adam Swirsky.
I think and I think Paul's
You're breaking up for me, Adam.
I think Paul's point, is obviously very valid and important. But I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we've just been through one of the most extraordinary years in generations at Harrow Council. Oh dear, I'm on my Wi-Fi.
You're cutting out. So turn the video off, Adam.
Try audio only, Adam, see if that helps.
How's that? No, yeah, I'm on that. Sorry. Any good?
I think it's better.
Okay. If you can hear me, all I was going to say that I think Paul's question is very valid, but I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we've come through one of the most extraordinary years for Harrow Council in a generation. And we've ended up, despite everything that's happened during COVID, we've ended up with a balanced budget. And we've even been able to put some money aside. And I think that's just hugely significant and something to really congratulate the officers for. But I think also the administration can take some credit for steering the council's finances in a way that could have gone in many directions and it's actually ended up in a very positive position.
Thank you, Adam. I just come off the back of that to say I know that John's team are still working out some of the details on the figures that Paul's asked for in that sense, but the main thing was to make sure that the budget was balanced and to be able to put some money aside into reserves, because next year's budget obviously is going to be very, very difficult to gain. So I think the credit with that is very important.
Thank you, Leader. If I could just add, I mean, I don't know if I missed it when Adam was breaking up, but I'm sure he meant to also say thank you to the government for its support that it's put into the council in terms of emergency support for COVID to help both the council through the year and also businesses throughout Harrow.
I was trying to demute myself. Adam just wants to come back. Adam?
Yes. Sorry, briefly, if people can hear me. I take the point that Councillor Osborne's making, and the government has come in with support. But having lived through the experience of week by week and month by month, when we were trying to make sure that we were supporting our social providers, when we were trying to make sure we were supporting our local businesses, when we were trying to completely transform the way the council operates, a shielding system, have a Harrow community hub in place, have a helpline in place. These were huge decisions with massive spending implications, and the government was not there at the time that we needed it most. And I think that some of the evidence that's coming out at the moment through released messages by certain former advisors just demonstrates the government was not there for local councils or frankly for the people of this country when they needed it most. But I do thank the government for coming in eventually, and I think that collectively the council has nonetheless managed to come out in a very strong position.
Thank you, Adam. Is there any other points? I just sort of follow on from the point that Adam was making, because I sat on that call back in March last year when the Secretary of State said we would be fully recompensed and reimbursed for funding that we had to spend in response to the COVID pandemic, and we are still waiting. And local government is still over nearly £3 billion adrift on what was promised and what was received. It was promised at the beginning on that conference call, and it is recorded so people can see what he said. And he hasn't been supported by his other cabinet members at the national level to bring that funding through, because it's been trying to backtrack for a number of years. And what is difficult, whilst the pandemic itself is difficult for all people and organisations, not just residents, but it's also organisations in responding to the pandemic. The things that have been going on some of those calls that are now coming back out through other released documents has shown the challenges that we faced locally, and they have not all been compensated for. So we thank you for the government for the funding they've given us already, but it's a bit like Oliver Twist in some sense, that when we keep going back and ask for more, we just said, you know, if Fagin comes in and says what more, and I am quite concerned, and it's something that I've not hidden away from. I am concerned that private sector can be overfunded to things, and local government has been underfunded, and that has been a consistent approach for the last 10 years, including through austerity. Thank you. Christine, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, before Paul comes in, I just thought I'd just make it clear that actually, even though Fagin was the bad guy, it was the big fat beadle who actually came in and sorted out poor old Oliver Twist when and a much more kind of Tory looking figure, if you want my opinion.
Thank you. Well, Oliver Twist in a cabinet meeting. Anyway, I'd also support Natasha's view right at the beginning. I think the finance team have done exceptionally well throughout the pandemic in the way they've been managed to produce the reports, but also keep control of the budgets and understand where it's all gone. You know, but these grants are coming up, and then you get the guidance comes through. It's been quite a challenge to make sure we've met that guidance, because if not, it'd have been clawed back, and that's one of the conditions of it. And it's been a lot of hard work. And I've worked for organisations that produce outturn returns reports, normally take at least 3 months. And this is done in less than 5 weeks. And I think that's an amazing testament of the work that people have put in to make sure this is done. So if Dawn could pass our thanks on to the team, it's gratefully appreciated. Thank you very much. The recommendations are on pages 276. Are they agreed?
Agreed.
Before everyone leaves, I know we haven't been notified of any other business. Is there any other business? I'm not asking for any, actually, no, there isn't. We now have to move into part 2. So, Nikesh, could we stop recording this meeting and take